Okay, so with that, I'd like to start off with a little bit of background information. So I'm Sarah Brown, Director of Marketing at DMD. I want to let you know that we will be recording today's session. Each attendee will receive a link to this recording shortly after the event. The presentation portion of today's webinar is about 30 minutes long, but we've held 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to address as many as possible as they come up or at the end. You can use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. The Q&A feature allows us to record your questions, so in the event we aren't able to get to all questions during today's webinar, we'll be able to follow up with you after. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jared Rickard. With his vast experience in email marketing, automation, analytics, Jared is the Senior Director of Product Management for Email at DMD. Jared has a knowledge of all things email, which encompasses managing email deployments, establishing email marketing automation programs, and leading creative design for digital campaigns. In his 14+ years in HCP marketing, Jared has developed and deployed thousands of successful email campaigns. And Jared has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Illinois Institute of Art, Chicago. So with that, Jared, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. So today we're going to get started on the first of 4 email webinars that we're going to be doing. The series is Email 101 for Healthcare Marketers. And today we're going to start at the top, at the beginning, with email strategy and how to build one. I do want to let you know that at the end of the presentation today, there will be 2 slides that are intended to be checklists of questions to ask ourselves. Whether we have never created an email strategy, there's a checklist for that. And there will also be a checklist for those of you who feel like you have an email strategy, but you're just not sure how it might be going. So let's dive in, because we have a short period of time today. I'm going to define for you what I believe goes into an email strategy. So I've laid out this graphic here. You can see there's many different things around the circle, things like objectives and goals and our audience, our cadence, the tone, and the content and message. Now, we're not going to be able to dive into every one of these things today, just because of the brief period of time that we have, but some of our additional webinars will address some of these issues. What we are going to address today, we are going to address the objectives and goals. We are going to address the cadence and the audience and things like that. So starting with our goals, because really in order to effectively create an email strategy for any email campaign or email itself, we need to understand what our overall goal is or business objective is. So we really want to start there, and I would call that the what. So this would be maybe a year-long goal or a 2-year-long goal. I've given a couple examples, one for the hospital marketplace and one for the pharma marketplace. I'll cover, for this particular case, I'm going to cover the hospital one first. Our business objective might be to move up a certain number of spots in our U.S. News and World Report rankings for the year. And then we might have a campaign that is running. Maybe it's a 3-month campaign, 1-month campaign, 5-month campaign, whatever the case may be. The example I laid out here would be to increase our video viewership of 2019 study data by 7% in Q2. And again, my strategy here is I'm thinking if I can get people to watch my videos, they're going to understand that I am the smartest cardiology department in the United States, and they'll vote for me in those U.S. News and World Report rankings. Now, at an email level, each and every email that I send should go to that campaign objective and thereby that business objective. So now I would think about repurposing existing video into an email. Instead of just driving people to the website, I would put the video right in the email itself to drive a higher click rate through to the other videos that I have and increase viewership right in the email. On the pharma side, you might be launching a new product or a new product indication for a product. So you're going to want to look at something maybe different in your campaign objective. Something along the lines of, I need to understand more about my target audience. So I'm going to target physicians who are reading about the new indication using AIM ecosystem data. So DMD, for example, has our AIM ecosystem data where we monitor or look at, report on what physicians are doing in our AIM ecosystem, and we can tell what they're reading. So I might use that over the course of this campaign, and I would set up then a personalized triggered campaign And at an email level, I'm going to use that personalization based on what they've been reading to increase the clicks by 6%. So these are the kind of objectives or strategies that we need to think about as we build our email campaign strategy overall. The next thing I want to look at is the audience that we start with, because it's important to think strategically about who we're going to bring in and how we're going to handle them. I'm going to use a fishing analogy here. I'm a Midwest boy. There's a lot of fishing that goes on. I personally don't fish a lot, but I like the analogy. So on the left side, you see we have a wide net, and on the right side, we have a fishing pole. And these really represent our broadcast campaigns, and then the fishing pole represents our targeted or triggered campaigns. Now, one of the most frequent mistakes I see people make is that they choose one or the other of these for their email strategy. And the thing is that these two actually complement each other very well. And any good email strategy is going to include both of them. The reason being, if we look at just the targeted or triggered campaigns that we do, I mean, it's tempting to say, look, I'm getting a really great response rate with these very triggered, targeted emails. It's not a huge audience, but everybody who I send these emails to tends to open, they tend to click. I think I'm growing a deeper relationship here. Maybe I should let go of some of these people who have not traditionally been responding that are from the wide net. The problem is, through attrition, you're actually going to eventually shrink that audience that you're fishing with the fishing pole down to a very small size if you're not continuing to bring people in through the wide net. As well, though the response rates may be lower in our broadcast campaigns, there is still going to be response. And because of the size of the audience, it may actually end up being more net people. So the best way to do this is to use that wide net, our broadcast emails, whether we're doing 1 a month or 4 a month, to feed into a more targeted pool where we take a look at the responses from the larger campaigns or the web traffic that results from it, and then create a deeper, more personalized experience for the smaller audience of people who are consistently responding. In order to do this, we really need to understand that our audience is the correct audience, and we're going to need to authenticate that audience. DMD spends a lot of time in this space with regards to authenticating that the email addresses that we have belong to the actual healthcare providers that we say they do. We put a ton of effort every day, every week, every month into this, but we also need to authenticate other data around this. So, you know, as you bring in other data, whether it's prescribing data or referral data, we need to be sure that we have the right data and that we're 100% positive it's correct. And so, you know, this is really an encouragement to select the right data sources that you're going to bring in. And the reason we're going to need those other data sources is that we want to craft and create an optimized audience for triggering. So with regards to that fishing pole group, we want to understand as much as possible about this group of healthcare providers so that we can effectively trigger. Again, you know, a mistake you could make here is trusting some data that you purchased or licensed that is maybe of lower quality. You might make a mistake like targeting for a hospital referral campaign, looking at a 100-mile radius around the hospital to see who is and isn't referring. You may accidentally pull in somebody who already is referring and hit them with a referral campaign. You may pull somebody in who's outside of that 100-mile radius. And that may not seem like a big deal, but the problem is that if we have people in our target list that do not belong in our target list, they're much more likely to complain or mark us as spam, which can cause then the emails not to get delivered to the inbox for the actual users that where you do have the correct data. So we want to make sure that we have the cleanest, most pristine lists of demographic data, email addresses, and all other data that we have on these healthcare providers. Just wanted to show you a couple of use cases of what I mean when I'm talking about that kind of fishing pole group, the triggered email group. You know, if we have our target list and again, we send it out, if the physician either meets demographic data requirements that we put in place, again, maybe they've been, you know, reading about something on the web that we're going to use as a trigger. They've been reading about the indication for the new indication that we have. We want to trigger an email to them, or possibly it's a website activity. They've landed on the site. They landed on our org site for our hospital, but we want to move them over to our specific physician site. Then I'm going to run a case of business rules, and I'm going to based on those business rules, make choices and send them either an email or possibly even a series of emails based on the behavior that they took. For example, in that hospital one, if they've been coming to my org site and looking around, and I've identified them and know that I would like to begin a relationship with them based on those business rules, I might send them 2 to 3 emails over the course of 2 weeks, repurposing the value of my healthcare provider specific site so that I can get them over to the content that would be most useful for them. And this is what that looks like on a time continuum. So again, looking at, different triggered campaign opportunities. This is based on, again, on DMD's AIM ecosystem data. So we can see at all the different publisher sites and healthcare-centric social media sites what the doctors are doing, what are they reading about, what are they interested in. And so based on these events, might choose again to send an email or trigger a series of emails to reinforce a message around what they've been reading so that we can be top of mind at the right moment for them.
And Jared, I think it's important perhaps to point out here, this idea of personalized engagement. I think we run into perhaps a lot of times when we're talking about personalization in email, there might sometimes be a default to, well, do you mean just including their name or maybe some demographic information? But what you're explaining here is perhaps a little bit more about, behavior, personalized engagements based on behaviors and actions.
Yeah, that
correct,
is
yes.
what I'm talking about here, Sarah. Yeah, and that can be accomplished through a lot of different methods. I mean, you might, again, at its most basic, you might have a series of 3 to 4 emails around some deeper topics. We're doing this right now for a CME event that we're promoting. And, we have some emails that go much deeper into who's speaking and some of the scientific topics. So if we see people engaging, we're going to give them that deeper content. I think at the highest level, you're going to have actually dynamic content. So you might have, maybe 3 emails, but each email might have, 5 or 6 blocks of content based on the specific thing that either the healthcare provider engaged with on your website or based on the specific behavior they've taken somewhere else, in the ecosystem, or whether they've been exposed to an ad or received social, some sort of social media promotion. And that would really be the top level of that. So when we move back over to the wide net, the broadcast net, and we look at the broadcast email, one of the most frequent questions I'm asked when I'm putting together these campaigns and building a strategy is, how often should I be sending broadcast email? And there's a couple factors to consider here. We have to consider, how are the audience members that we're sending email to, how are they responding to the email we're sending? And then we also are going to have to consider how much content we have. But covering off on audience response, immediately we have to make a break in our target audience by saying, do we have engagers and where do we have non-engagers? And we can't treat them the same, or at least we don't want to treat them the same. So when we have an engaged audience, people who are opening or they're reading or they're clicking, we have an opportunity to reach them more frequently, provided we have the content to do so. And so my generalization there would be to say, we should reach them every 5 to 7 days. We can echo the email on day 3 to non-responders. I always recommend sending an echo send out of any email, only because in most recent years, doctors' inboxes are so much busier than they ever were before, and they continue to get busier. And so it may be a case of they just didn't see the email until much later in the day, and it was buried in their inbox. So we want to give them the opportunity to see the message in the top of their inbox at least twice. So we'd echo on day 3, and then we could send another different piece of content on 4 days after that, or on day 7. And we really want to create this atmosphere where we're building a deeper relationship with these folks. So they're our engaged broadcast audience. For the non-engaged audience, we need to stretch that out a little bit more, because we don't initially necessarily know why they're not engaging with us. Maybe they're already predisposed and have an opinion of our brand. And so sending them additional email is just going to, heighten some sense of irritation. So we want to give it a little bit more time between these messages as well. We don't want to drive higher opt-outs. So that's really going to be the KPI we have to look at with the non-engaged audience. Are we starting to see opt-outs creep up? So here I would say that you could send the email on day 1, echo again on day 3, And then you're going to wait a full week before you would send them different content. Now, you are going to need to have a lot of content to maintain this kind of strategy, but this is really the way to build a deep relationship with the audience. I do want to call out what we're defining as engagement. At DMD, we define engagement in terms of opens within the last 90 days. Now, again, we're doing a lot of sending, so we have the luxury of saying open in the last 90 days is engagement. And we stretch that out a little bit more for clicks, because not every email, as we'll discuss in a little bit, necessarily has to drive to a website, and not every email is going to get clicked. So we give a little bit more time for that. I do want to call out here, that this does require you to be sending on a regular basis to truly understand that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
Jared, I just want to interrupt for one moment.
Yep.
I forgot to mention at the beginning of this webinar that we do have the slides in the handout section. So for anyone who may want to print and take notes or have this as a follow-up, you can look to the handouts and they're there now.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So I rolled this up into some bullet points here. And this is where we start to talk a little bit about the content. So you can do 2 touches per month with your responders per unique piece of content. The one thing we don't want to do is keep sending the exact same piece of content over and over and over again, especially to people who are responding to it. That will definitely cause them to become non-responders over time. And again, ideal content cadence is to be 3 to 4 unique pieces a month. So ideally speaking, again, to really build a relationship, you're going to be sending to these people, probably weekly, ideally. One of the things, though, that I often am confronted with is, well, I don't have enough content for that. But I will tell you, because I have the unique privilege of looking at a very large amount of email that's being sent through DMD, that most emails that I see actually contain enough content for 2 to 3 emails. Shorter emails definitely are getting better responses today than longer emails. And so it is a great opportunity to break an email up into more than one email and use that to continually maintain this relationship. For our non-responders, we're only going to want to do 1 touch per month per unique piece of content. And our ideal content cadence here, again, is going to be 4 pieces of content per month. But the difference here is that we're going to have to take a look at what do we have in our content asset library. And we may have to bring in some things that are maybe not necessarily a part of our campaign. Things like a video, video emails that link to videos, they get open at a much higher rate. So if we're looking to bolster that engagement, we're going to want to bring in things like video. The other thing here is we might want to create some short, 1 to 2 question, 3 question surveys to find out a little bit more about our audience. The reason for this is that for whatever reason, doctors as a sort of persona like to have their voices heard. Every time we send out surveys, we get good response rates. And even if the survey is not incented, as long as it's short, doctors want to share their opinion. And this is also a great opportunity, again, to learn a little bit more about this non-responding audience. Why are they not responding? Is there something we could be doing different? Is the cadence right? Is the content right? We can ask these kind of questions, especially if we create a series of them. There are a bunch of tools now available on the web for very low cost to do these kind of surveys. And I highly recommend it as a way to get engagement from your non-responders.
Jared, before you move on, what about in a scenario where you've got, what is too much? Do you have a scenario where you've got multiple brands trying to reach the same audience of HCPs and physicians, or you've got, departments or service lines all trying to go after the same audience? At some point, healthcare marketers could be reaching their same targets more than what you're suggesting here, 8,
Sure.
12, 16 times a month, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sarah. I think the question you're asking me is if you had a pharma company who had more than one brand reaching the same specialty group, you could definitely oversend to them. So the answer I have to that is what it really comes down to there is the from line. If the from line is the company name, for example, then you would end up in a scenario where you would definitely be reaching out to those doctors way too many times if each brand followed best practices on this in terms of cadence. But the way to get around that is actually to use a unique from line for each brand. So go out as the brand name instead or something else in order to create some differentiation between these brands. The analogy I would use there would be if I go out to go shopping for a new car and maybe I've chosen that I really want to get a German sports sedan because I like German sports sedans. If I go and I look at Volkswagen and I look at Audi and I look at Porsche, and trying to make a decision, if each one of them send me emails after I've been to their dealership, even though all of those car companies are owned by Volkswagen, I'm not going to ascribe it to Volkswagen sending me too many emails. So I think that would be the way I would look at it. And we do frequently see that companies that have more than one brand reaching out to the target list don't see attrition because the brands are uniquely sending more often. So with regards to this last topic I want to cover with regards to the actual message cadence here, transactional emails can occur, and we highly recommend the use of transactional emails, again, to bolster content. So you could define transactions in many different ways. It could be that they showed up your site and filled out a form. They could have come to your booth at a conference. It could be, depending on how you look at it, it could be that they're actively prescribing your product. But these transactions, they may result in an email or should result in an email. And if they do, there's no real cadence for transactional email. You can fire transactional email off at will. I don't know that I'd fire more than one off in a day. In this particular case, if somebody showed up at my site 3 times in the day and filled out different forms, as long as they were different places, maybe I would. But if they fill out the same form more than once, I think I'd just send them one. But there's no real limit on transactional email. And again, transactional email is a great way to get engagement because people typically will engage with an email resulting in them having interacted with your brand in a meaningful way, again, like visiting you at a booth. So then we also have to look at the cadence over time, not just on a message strategy. And this is real world data from a client of ours where through unfortunate circumstances, with regards to business decisions, they decided not to send a couple months last year. And each and every time that they stop sending, we see the engagement rates fall off and they have to regain ground. The reason is that as we warm up a list to our brand, takes maybe 2 to 3 sends, maybe even 4 sends before the audience really becomes truly warm. The second we don't send to them, they cease to be as warm as they were and they start to cool off. And then we have to remake up that ground. So you can see that here. The other thing that's interesting here is that this brand it's a fantastic brand and a lot of engagement for them overall. HCPs, healthcare providers, went back in those months and found emails from the month before and still clicked on them because they wanted to engage with the brand's content. So again, we really want to create a scenario where we've got a consistent sending schedule over the course of the year. Again, at least 1 message a month minimum. But certainly, ideally speaking, it would be even more than that, so that our brand is constantly top of mind with each one of these healthcare providers. The other thing I will call out here is that when you do sporadic sending or irregular sending, meaning maybe you send once a quarter, but then for a period of time you send 5 emails a month, you have a very hard time actually gauging who is an engager and who is not an engager. In order to create one of those non-engagement strategies, you really have to have consistent sending behavior. The next topic I want to look at is when do we send these emails? And this is for anyone who's a client of ours here on this call. You may have seen one of these reports. We provide these. This is a breakdown of all the oncologist sends that DMD has done for the last year and when the oncologists open the email. And then I'm going to show you the radiologists. So there's the radiologist group on the left and the oncologists on the right. These two groups can frequently get combined together when doing a send, right? We're going to send to the oncologists and radiologists because this message is relevant to both of them. But they're not the same. They share some similarities, right? So you can see that, for the radiologists, Thursday afternoon is the ideal time to send to this group. And for the oncologists, the ideal time is Tuesday morning. The Thursday morning, Tuesday morning is okay for the other group, but it's not optimal. And so really we would want to break these two segments up and send at their truly optimal time. The next level beyond this, and for anyone who deploys with DMD, we offer send time optimization, but that would be to do send time optimization, which is literally going to send the email to the healthcare provider at the exact right time based on their previous open and click behavior. But if you're not, and you need to make generalizations, you really don't want to combine uniquely different groups. The other thing I could overlay here would be the NPs and PAs. They're going to open and click at a totally different time than the physicians are. And so again, we want to take these segments and break them apart, test, learn, understand when they're going to open these emails, because we really want to maximize every opportunity we have to get engagement with these groups. The next topic I wanted to talk about today is tone. For anyone who's on the call who's sat through one of my riveting email workshops, you know that I talk about tone when I talk about subject lines and pre-headers, but it's also important to consider tone for our campaign overall. And the reason I say this is we want to make sure that if we have a campaign that's launching, let's say we've got that new indication and it's about to launch next month, there's a lot of excitement around that, right? And we want to capitalize on that tone. So there's excitement for us, there's excitement for the patients who are now going to get relief through this new indication. I want then to be able to look at my messages across this campaign, whether it's 3 months or 5 months, and recognize that elements of those emails should always be tying back to that tone. There should always be an air of excitement, whether it's in the subject line or the pre-header or the calls to action or the headlines. If I'm trying to move up in US News and World Report rankings, and I feel like the answer to that again is that doctors need to see all the interesting things that my hospital system is doing around the area of cardiology. I might use challenge. So for the next 4 emails I'm going to send, I'm going to ask a question. Have you seen? Did you know? And I'm going to send them to the videos, or I'm going to maybe give them a survey or quiz to see how they're doing. Do they understand all the new information that I put out there? And I'm going to utilize that tone across the board. We don't want to have disparate tones coming in to our campaigns, ideally speaking, because it creates a little bit of confusion. What are they trying to tell me? I'm excited, but now they're talking about safety. So those are the type of things we want to think about and want to assign that tone. It'll help us write our subject lines as well. Touching on content, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we have a content webinar coming up on the 6th of November, but I will give you a couple nuggets to take away. If we're trying to drive to the website, we want to keep the email short, and we want to get a call to action in the first 400 pixels. The reason being, there are going to be some doctors that just want to click through and get to your website. We see that behavior frequently. I call them quick clickers. So the best way to do that is to get the calls to action up high in the email and to keep our subject lines and pre-headers relatively short. Again, I will say that I believe email is an excellent channel for pushing digital content, especially deep scientific content. Email is almost like a temporary website in that it's archival, it's persistent, somebody can come back to it at any time. So it's a very viable channel for just pushing information. And if you're going to do that, and you want them to digest your content in email, put charts, graphs, give them at least 2 minutes of written content, put a longer form video in it. Here you can get away with a longer subject line, pre-header. Set the tone by, creating the environment. This is a deep scientific email, so you can put a deep scientific subject line and pre-header in it. If we want to re-engage those non-engagers, again, we want to go back to short. We can utilize more graphics, make the email pretty. Personalize. Personalize the content. Make sure there's personalized salutation, personalize the pre-header. That personalization is going to feel more intimate. It's much more likely to engage people who are not engaging with your brand, make them feel like you understand them. And again, use video and surveys to increase that engagement rate. So the last 2 things I want to cover here, and I'm going to leave these for you to read, but I am going to cover a couple things on each one of them. So if you don't have a strategy, you should have a strategy. Everyone should have a strategy for email, whether you're just sending one or you're sending one a day. You're a medical publisher and you're sending one a day. You need to have a strategy. Couple things I do want to call out here. Again, you need to take inventory. How much content do you have? Your content should dictate how many messages you're sending in a month. If you feel like you don't have enough content, and DMD's got a product that we do it's like a motion video email where we can actually take print content and turn it into a video email. Search high and low. Most hospitals, I think, don't realize that they have a lot of content. It may be in written form, it may be sitting around, behind the walls of the hospital, but there's a ton of content there. And repurpose it. Repurpose something from a couple months ago in a new way. And again, if you've got video, but you just don't have it in email, find a way to get the video into the email. Always want to start the conversation with what is the content I have that provides value to my targets instead of what do I want to tell my targets. This is going to create a much better experience for your audience. They're going to engage at a much higher rate. They won't feel like they're being lectured. And then always want to consider, what am I going to do with the people who don't respond to this? It's not an option to say I don't have a plan to respond with, or don't have a plan to handle my non-responders. We always want to be prepared to handle that non-responder, give them something shorter, crisper. Again, bring video, survey them, whatever the case may be, we need to have a plan for dealing with them. I think for a lot of people on the call today, you may have a strategy and you're just not totally sure it's working, or maybe you suspect that it isn't working. I think that's something I frequently, recognize. People will contact me and say, I'm not totally sure my emails are working. So, I mean, obviously the first place to look here is, are the response rates meeting my expectations? My realistic expectations. So if they're not, then we need to do this, run through some of these things. Does the amount of fresh content that you have match your current sending schedule, or are you resending messages over and over and over again? This is one of those areas, again, I think very frequently we get into a habit, especially at the end of the year, and this is very timely, of thinking, oh, I've got budget left, I'm just going to resend the same content. Well, you can definitely do that. As long as you make enough meaningful changes to it. Sometimes it's enough to just change the subject line and pre-header, but you don't want to get into a consistent habit of that, and you want to plan accordingly. When you go into planning season in January, think about next November and December and reserve some content to hold back to have fresh in November and December, so that you can ensure that you're not sending the same content over and over and over again. One of the other things I think here that I want to call out is, are you asking for feedback from your audience? If you're not, that's something I think a lot of us need to repent of. I know I do frequently as well. We aren't asking enough. What do we think, or what do they think of what we're doing? What do they think they need from us? How can we better serve them? And again, that's a great opportunity for engagement.
Well, I'll add to that too, Jared. It's a great opportunity for me right now to make our poll live, which is to ask everyone to let us know how you feel this presentation is going. Before we get into the full Q&A, I just want to open that and let everyone know that it's open. Oh, sorry, Jared, go ahead.
No problem. Thanks, Sarah. The last thing I just was going to call out here is, am I currently testing anything? And one of the things we didn't cover on today is analytics. But if we are doing some testing, are we actually applying those learnings? Are we looking back at the campaigns? Are we looking at them over time? Do we see things like attrition popping up? And again, if you are testing something, whether it's subject line or pre-header or tone, what are you doing with it? Again, that's one of those areas I see as a frequent opportunity, is people are testing. They're looking at the results, but they're not necessarily looking at the results over time and doing anything meaningful with it. I think the only other thing I want to call out is that we do have a lot of additional information on the topics I covered today. I have spent a lot of time, Sarah's spent a lot of time, our organization spends a lot of time creating ebooks. We've got some videos, short form videos to cover on some of these topics. And we'd love to have you come take a look if you just need a refresher or a reminder.
And I've just added two additional handouts, two ebooks. One which is the ebook that's on the slide, and then another one if you'd like to access them directly from this webinar. So jumping into questions, one of an earlier question that came in when you were talking about triggered and personalized programs. Someone had a question about where are they reading this content, physicians. What perhaps you can go into a little bit of detail about the AIM ecosystem that we talk about a lot and that perhaps some of our audience might not be familiar with.
Sure. Yeah. So the AIM ecosystem basically consists of it's a lot. I don't have the exact
I think we're
number.
close to 900 plus.
900, yeah.
I think we're on that. Either if we're not there yet, we're very close to being there.
I was gonna say, I know it's right around 1,000. Medical websites. A lot of them are medical publishers, and we have readers there that are able to, report back then on the actual healthcare provider at a unique personal level. So meaning it's not de-identified. We're able to tell who was there. Because the readers are across their sites, we're able to tell and contextualize what they've been reading on those medical publication sites. And again, we also have some medical social networks and some other sites in there as well, that we are able to tell, again, what they are engaging with. And so when we see that and then contextualize it, we can make informed decisions on the content that we would send to them based on their behavior. So it's an awesome opportunity.
And it's a technology that's proprietary to DMD. So I think it's something that our current clients who are using it are to the example that you gave, the triggered example, are looking to leverage it for those types of programs, behavior-based programs. Yeah. Is my understanding, right?
Absolutely. And then as well, wherever we do have reader sites, a lot of those clients then take advantage of the opportunity of also triggering in real time. So again, that would be site traffic based stuff. So, if we put AIM readers on a site, then when we see people land on certain pages, we can take action immediately from that as well. So we also do those kind of triggered programs, based on the page that a healthcare provider has landed on. We can send them an individualized email, a couple hours later, based on where they were on the site. So both at a group level based on, reading behavior, and then on a site level for triggered email.
Great. So this question came in, and I had to laugh a little bit because this one always trips me up too. So are the character counts that you're suggesting, are those with or without spaces? And I always have to look this one up because I can never remember.
Yes, you should count spaces. Again, ideally speaking, we always want to be shorter, more crisp than possible, but yes, you would count the spaces in there. And so, I think that's consideration there is how many words you want to get in, because of how many spaces it will create. Now, I always say this with subject lines. It's not like a hard and fast rule. There is a point at which they will get cut off, right? And that's why the character count is what the character count is. Every device now is different. Even different versions of iPhones are different. The real issue is that if you are going to go with a longer subject line, you really want to front load it with the bulk of your message. And then you really want to tie it to your pre-header, meaning you want to create one full statement between the subject line and the pre-header. You have a lot more character count to play with in the pre-header, right? So you can put a lot more text in there. And again, that would be the, if you think about the inbox, the dark text, as the subject line. You got your from line, your subject line, and then the lighter gray text is going to be that pre-header. So you can utilize that to great effect. And I recommend personalization go in the pre-header just so you don't use the character count up from the subject line.
I think this next question is going to make you happy, Jared. So someone is asking if we can go back to the video concept you have mentioned about placing video and email, and how is the video embedded? How does this work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sarah. So about 2 years ago, HTML5 got enabled in email, and so it's a interactive format, right? So we can actually stream the video through the email. So the video isn't riding there, and the file size of the video doesn't ride with it. It's just streaming the video through the HTML5 embedded in the email. And it's a very cool technology. DMD has spent a lot of time training. We have a couple experts in video email that do that. And then again, you can repurpose not just video content, but also, sort of slide content into like motion graphics using that HTML5 video. The one consideration to make there is that it doesn't work everywhere. So it does not work in Outlook, for example. And so the complexity really comes down to being able to code the responsive design fallback for the times when the video doesn't get displayed. But we do see that about 70 to 75% of the average campaign is going to be iPhone users. So it's definitely, as they say, the juice is definitely worth the squeeze on doing that.
I think that's a good thing to highlight, because I think perhaps sometimes we think doctors are only using their organizational email. But I think what you're saying is that what we find in the data and the device usage is that they're also using their own devices, their own native like iOS email apps, etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that again, about 70 to 75% of the time they're going to open on an Apple device. And, we see in any given day, now this shifts literally daily for DMD because we are always putting the most active email that we have for a physician into the first position. But at any given time, typically speaking, about 65 to 70% of the email addresses in first position are actually personal email addresses. A lot of doctors, I think, again, in the post changes to insurance and everything else, I think the doctors are a lot busier during the day. And so again, we saw earlier, you're seeing these engagement times when I went back to that chart, it's like late afternoon. They're engaging with content, and again, then they're usually engaging with it on their personal device. We even see a lot of doctors opening emails, really early in the morning, probably before they're headed out to the gym. And again, that's going to be on a personal device, not on their workstations.
Well, thanks, Jared. I think that gets us through all of our questions today.
Great.
So thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it.
I do want to let everyone know that we will be emailing the link to the recorded webinar once it's zipped up, so you'll get an email from us. If there's anything we can help you with, please feel free to contact us directly. Visit our website or email us at info@dmdconnects.com, and we'd be happy to support your email marketing needs.